All right.
Alrighty, welcome everybody. I know I've met some of you. My name is Maren and I've been at Prayer Hub before, but we're really excited to be able to do this presentation together today. And our topic is Connecting Beyond Differences, Key Conversation Skills. So we're hoping that this is going to be a really practical time.
So, for those of you who don't know, this is my wife, Maren, and she is a therapist. She does brain spotting. She's certified in Daring Way. Amazing work that she does. She has her own private business doing therapy, and we have been joined together for 32 years and been married, and we have started now a new consulting business together.
Yeah, so today we're here representing our consulting coaching business. So we're coming at it from the relational standpoint and more coaching. This is Simon, my husband. He is a physician specializing more in geriatrics right now. He is an amazing guy. One of my favorite things that I love about him is that he sees things with hope and he loves to say yes. I think as humans, like coming from the psychology part, we tend to go, oh, what do we don't want? Or if we have a new idea, like what are all the problems with that idea? Simon is not like that at all. He just sees like all the possibility and wants to say yes to that, and I absolutely love that about him. And he perseveres. So some of the struggles that we faced in our marriage over the 32 years, I really attribute a lot to Simon going, we can work this out. Yes.
And not that it was easy to do that.
Easy, but yes.
But one of the things that, as we kind of get going, is you think about conversations that you have with loved ones, with colleagues, whoever it might be. Think about some of those challenging conversations. Why are they challenging? Why does conflict happen? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to talk a little bit about, very practically, how can you actually work through that in very, very simple ways. So the handout you have also has a QR code on it, and that QR code will actually take you to one of the things we're doing is called the Transformative Relationship. And so that QR code will take you to that website, and it'll give you some more information about what we're doing. And this is a small part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're going to start off with one basic concept, which really is kind of the key to being alive, but the key to the how we're approaching, how do you resolve differences with each other? And that is God has wired us for connection. You're wired for connection. I'm going to read that Romans 12 passage and just listen about God's desire for connection. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all.
One of the things that's interesting about that verse and also challenging about that verse is, one, it's very clear what God's desire for us is in relationship with each other, with ourselves, but also the fact that we only have control over ourselves. Right? I can't control what you're thinking, I can't control what you're saying, I can't control what your emotions are. I can only be here with me. And so one of the key pieces of resolving conflict is knowing ourselves. It's really one of the key pieces that we really need to understand.
So we're going to ask for some feedback. We're inviting you to imagine when you have experienced that connection with another person that feels safe, that you enjoy. And as you imagine that, what was your experience? What happened inside your thinking, inside of your heart, maybe in your body? What was the fruit of that good connection?
The relationship grew.
Growth, yeah, that's a good one.
It was safe.
Safety, yes.
Safety's a big part of that for sure.
Joy.
Joy,
Yeah.
yeah.
And somebody understands.
Yes,
Mm.
somebody gets me.
Yeah.
Somebody gets me.
Yeah.
Such a big deal.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, like a shift in my spirit happened when
Yeah.
I realized I was seen and actually known by another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to be seen and known.
We
I
talk-
know, it's so powerful.
We talk about being seen, heard, and valued,
Mhm.
right? Seen, heard, and valued. We think that's sort of at the core of really good relationships, is when both parties, both individuals, both groups feel seen, heard, and valued.
I love all those answers.
Yeah.
This material that we're talking about today comes from a training that we've done called Safe Conversations. And this is what they say about connection. When we experience that connection, we experience full aliveness, relaxed joyfulness, and a sense of wonder. I'm like, who wouldn't want to live like that? You know, that's so good.
And we don't always live like that.
And we don't.
And so what we want to ask ourselves is what's getting in the way, right? God is calling us to this type of relationship which is full and vibrant and joyful and safe. And there are times that we don't feel that way. And we need to ask ourselves, why does that happen?
Coming more from that psychological therapeutic view, there's a basic concept that I try to remember, I tell my clients, that when we are experiencing depression, anxiety, trauma, we often feel alone. It's like going into that fear of disconnection when we're experiencing those things. So really, what is going to help us through that is safe connection. So this is part of the path to notice is, when do we feel alone? When do we go into that fear of being disconnected?
So I've been coaching other physicians for the last 15 years as part of my side job. And I can tell you that sense of aloneness is pervasive right now. And it doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter where you are in your career, it is absolutely pervasive. And so for us, our passion is, how do we help people recognize that this relation, these connections, can actually be the solution to this sense of aloneness.
Yeah, that's making me think of another statistic, Gen Z, which is like middle school up to mid-20s. They are the loneliest generation. And that is just so heartbreaking to me. You know, I think COVID just cultivated a lot of that feeling of aloneness.
And despite all the, quote, connection we've
Yeah.
got on social media,
Yeah.
or on screens, gaming, whatever it might be, their sense of aloneness is very, very high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens when we start to understand that these connections are really a path to healing from trauma, anxiety, depression, but losing that connection is actually our greatest fear, right? If you think about it, if you had no connection, you felt alone, you probably wouldn't feel safe. You probably wouldn't feel like you're full of joy. You wouldn't be filled with the Spirit even so much, because the Spirit requires us to be in community. He wants us to be in community.
So Philippians 2 says, do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. So the question I'm going to throw out to you guys is, you know, God's inviting us to connection. He's inviting us, stop complaining, stop arguing, and yet we see that all over the place. Why do you think that people argue?
A lot of times because they don't feel seen or heard.
Okay.
So they think they have to get louder to be seen or heard.
Okay.
They want their
Yeah.
voice heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And validate their beliefs
Yeah.
or their core values, even though they're could be very skewed.
Right.
Yeah.
Validations.
Yeah, wanting
Sure.
that validation. Yeah.
The feeling, well, I guess valued but significant. I have something to say, it's important.
It has meaning,
Mhm.
right? That's what I think they're getting to, that meaning. I have meaning.
Yes,
Yeah, I have worth.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right, yeah.
Connection.
connection.
Mhm.
I mean, even if it's warped, even when
Right.
you're arguing, you're still talking
Yeah.
rather than not talking.
Mhm.
So I would tell you, interestingly,
I think I know what you're gonna say.
yeah, I know, I know you know that. So in my family, connection was all about arguing and debating. That was connection. There was no sense of love or warmth. It was all in the debate. It was all in the argument. And it's interesting when you say that. For a long time, I didn't recognize it as my sense of connection, but I do recognize it when I don't have it. It's like, oh, and in fact, I would bring that into our relationships. Like, I'm going to start a fight because I know I'm going to feel connected. That doesn't work well for me. Just say that right up front.
Marriage.
Our marriage doesn't work well, right?
So our proposal, we agree with all what you
Yes.
guys have said about arguing. But here's a basic, kind of easy to remember way to explain it or to think about arguing. That when there is conflict or when there is arguing, it's an objection to difference. Conflict is an objection to difference. So it's, hey, you see things differently than I do. And if we get in that mode of, I need to be right or I need to be seen, we start objecting to somebody else having a different opinion. And if you think about at a basic level of we want to be safe and we want to be connected, a lot of times differences feel threatening. And when we feel threatened, our anxiety is going to go up, our defenses are going to go up, and that spins into this conflict.
And this threat is a very existential type of threat. It feels like I am internally, it feels really big as a loss, right? And so we may not actually characterize it that way. If we were to talk to somebody, we wouldn't say it that way, but I can tell you the emotions related to it are a really big emotion. And so we want to make sure we're not minimizing the fact that this loss of connection is really powerful. And it actually then can give you preconceived ideas of future connections, right? And so that's what we're trying to sort of break that cycle with.
Yeah, you start predicting and anticipating even if it hasn't even happened yet.
Right.
And as humans, it's normal. I mean, I'm going to say something that sounds so obvious, but sometimes if we don't clearly understand it or see it, we get tangled up in it, is that it is normal to experience connection, disconnection, and then hopefully reconnection. Now, a lot of relationships don't ever get to reconnection. It's we connect and then we disconnect, and then somehow magically, if we ignore it, are we reconnected again? I don't know. But our brains have been patterned from growing up in an imperfect world around that cycle. And that actually perpetuates that fear of, oh my gosh, if I choose to go into intimacy, if I choose to grow this relationship, whoa, that fear of disconnection can really increase our anxiety. Yeah.
And so part of it is we're saying that this is normal, right?
Normal,
It is
yeah.
normal to have connection, disconnection, reconnection. Think about your closest relationship. It's not a bed of roses all the time. I can almost guarantee you it's not, because we all have these things that come up that we bring from our past, that we pull in from our present, that we pull in based on our capacity, our emotional state, our emotional self-awareness, self-regulation, that then actually feeds into how am I going to interact in this relationship. And so we want to normalize this connection, disconnection, reconnection. The place that a lot of people get stuck is they go between connection and disconnection and don't do the reconnection part. What we're talking about today is how do we do the reconnection.
And, just from our own relationship, I mean, we so wanted a good marriage. We so wanted intimacy and connection. And the reality is, even though we wanted that, 100%, we did not have the tools. So what we have learned, and I guess our approach is, we can learn relationship skills. That is something that we can practice and invest in. And just having a desire to stop complaining and arguing sometimes doesn't get us to that point of going, what's the alternative? Like I mentioned at the beginning, our brains are wired for, well, I don't want to argue, but what do I do instead? If we don't have a place to pivot into or shift into, our brains go back to that old path of arguing because that's what's familiar.
It's like saying, don't think of an elephant. Automatically, everyone's thinking of an elephant, right? If I say, don't argue, then you're thinking about the times you've argued, right? If you say, don't complain, you're thinking, oh, okay, I can remember the last time I complained, right? So what we're saying is, if we're not going to do those things, what's the substitute? What are we going to do instead? Because we can think as hard as we can about things we don't want to do. That doesn't give us the tools to do things that we want to do.
So in James, it says this, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." And what we came to see is that our training in this safe conversation specifically really followed this verse about being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And what I think is really cool is, I used to read this verse and go, oh, slow to speak, I'm just not going to say anything because that feels safer. But our approach doesn't mean that. It's how do we get to what you guys have been sharing. Each of us feels seen, heard, validated, and honored, even when we have opposing perspectives.
What's interesting about, I don't think any of this is brain science, right? I mean, we're all sitting here saying, yep, that all makes sense. And yet what we struggle with is how do we actually put it into action? How do we actually make this happen? I can tell you the skills we're going to teach today transformed our relationship. It wasn't just like, oh, things are better now. It was transformational. Not only in our relationship with each other, in our relationship with our kids, and even in our relationships with our clients, with the people we work with. It absolutely changed every single relationship that we were in Boulder.
Yeah. I'm thinking you guys can all relate, because it seems like a human thing, is that we would have the same arguments over and over, like, hey, if we start talking about this, we're just gonna circle around that same, we could just...
Board, play.
We already know what I'm gonna say, what you're gonna say. Those have completely stopped. I mean, that's a radical statement, but using these tools, we don't do that anymore.
And even when we do have things that are difficult to talk about, we all have those things that come up, right? And we always sort of struggle, oh, what's going to happen if I bring this up? Or what's the other person going to think? We now have a mechanism to be able to enter into that conversation with safety, with honor, and with respect for each other, because we've built this over time to trust, to value each other's opinion, and to be curious about each other. Because one of the things that, as we've done this, and like I said, we've been married for 32 years, we've known each other 35 years, and so we've known each other a long time. And I can tell you, when we started using these tools, there was so much we learned about each other, just about our core selves, about our core being. And it was really amazing, because we're like, man, we know each other, right? We've known each other a long time. And yet we were starting to make these connections with each other about our experiences that really gave us a much deeper understanding about each other.
And I can say I've learned more about myself by doing these type of conversations. So, okay, we're going to start off with some key concepts, like foundational things. We're going to go over this kind of on a high level. This is all in our course. And then we're going to get into how do you have this type of conversation.
So when you think about some of the key concepts, one of the first ones is recognizing there's a space between us, right? It can be a little bit of space, it can be a lot of space. That space is dynamic. And part of that space is determined by the energy I put into it, right? It's determined by the words I put into it. It's determined by my sense, my emotional state, right? What emotions am I putting into it? And the same is true for Mark. So if I recognize that there's this dynamic space between us, there's a lot going on in this space. And if I don't think about this space, if I don't ask Martin, how are you doing? Are we able to have this conversation? Because the space between us is going to sort of determine that. That becomes something that we need to really hold on to and recognize.
I mean, we used to think intimacy was like the closer we could get, and now we're realizing this actually feels so much more intimate. And as our capacity grows to hold these different perspectives, we actually feel like closer and like our relationship is expanding instead of, like smothering each other.
Right.
Another key concept is, what do we do when we are in a conversation or in a situation where our anxiety goes up? And there's different stances, and we're just gonna acknowledge these so you could be aware, like, hey, when do I turn toward that person? Like this space, like, okay, we need to talk about this, it feels uncomfortable, but I'm gonna turn toward you, I'm gonna see you, I'm gonna hear you. Or, you wanna go?
Yeah, or am I gonna turn away?
Mhm.
Am I going to avoid having that conversation? And I'm gonna be like, if I look over here, everything's fine. Right? And so again, and recognize that the turn away can be very physical and it can be very emotional.
Mhm.
Now, part of what happens for a lot of people is that they actually use their emotions almost as a weapon. So if I'm gonna turn away emotionally, it can actually get weaponized.
Mhm. Another stance, turning against, which is more going to the fight mode. Turning away might be like going into flight. Turning against, going into that fight mode.
And then the other thing to think about is if you're people pleasing. What happens in people pleasing is what we're saying is my voice is now, I'm so worried about how my voice is going to be heard, I'm not gonna use my voice. I'm just gonna go along with whatever the other person says. How many of you can relate to any one of or all of those, right? These happen all the time. This is very, very common.
Another concept is monologue versus dialogue. And oftentimes, when we talk to people, it is a monologue. One person's going on, and the other person is maybe listening, maybe tuning out, maybe formulating, what am I gonna say in response in my head, coming up with all the objections. That's gonna naturally come up, so are you gonna focus on the objections, or are you gonna keep listening, and can I listen for more than 5 minutes, That's the monologue. What we're inviting ourselves and you guys into today is dialogue. Each person gets a chance to share, each person gets a chance to listen and be heard. So there's a sender and then there's a receiver.
And this was actually radical. This was one of the things that radically changed how I interacted with my patients. Because as a doctor, it's very easy to get a monologue. And some of you may have had that experience with physicians that you've had, where we get into this monologue and they're telling you all the things that they want to tell you, and then in about 3 minutes later, they've got their hand on the handle of the door because they're heading out of the door, out of the room, right? How many of you have had that experience, right? It's very common. And so for me, being in dialogue rather than monologue has radically changed the interactions I can have with people, because they do feel like I have something that I want to offer. You may not agree with me, but it's important that you hear me, you understand me, you understand where I'm coming from. And so that change from monologue to dialogue radically changed how I really interacted, not only with my patients, but with really everybody.
So thinking about when you want to bring up a conversation, especially if something that there's an objection or it feels uncomfortable, a few key things to keep in mind that really helps. So if you don't take anything else away and you applied one of these, it's going to make a difference in your relationship, is asking, hey, I'd like to talk about finances. Is now a good time? Because often we just charge in with what we're thinking and thinking about the space between. I mean, if I've done that to Simon hundreds of times and he's like in work mode, that doesn't go well. But it's being respectful and honoring, like, hey, he might not be in the headspace to have this conversation. So if now's not a good time, hey, when is it going to work for both of us?
One of the other areas that this might happen for you guys is when you're tired. Right? How many of you are like late night trying to have this conversation? It's like, it does not go well, right? Don't let the sun go down in your anger. It's like, wow, I shouldn't have had to open my mouth right then, right? I mean, it should not have said it. So, I mean, again, recognize that there are times when it's not the best time, even though you may be thinking about it, it may be really in the forefront of your mind. If you're really wanting to have a real conversation with someone, a real dialogue, then both people have to be ready for the dialogue.
How much time do we have, Marie?
You have till like 10:15.
10:15,
Okay,
okay.
perfect.
Let's just keep an
Yeah.
eye on that, okay. So another one, using I language, it's very easy to point the finger. You always do this, you never do this, hey, you made me feel this way. All of that is starting with you. And if we just switch that around, which can take some like concentration and intentionality, is, hey, right now I'm feeling, or right now I'm experiencing.
And we're not saying, I feel because you did, right? Because that's actually just changing the language a little bit to say, I'm starting with I, but you're actually talking about you, right? So we really want to avoid even adding that statement at the end of it, because sometimes we want to.
Yeah. Some other things here is talk respectfully and kindly. That's kind of an obvious one, but not necessarily when our, brain is going offline. Never, ever shame, blame, or criticize. That's a biggie. Also be succinct. So if I'm going to share something with Simon, actually we did that this morning, and I'm like, I'm going to give you an appreciation. And then I talked for like 2 minutes. I went into monologue, and he's like, I don't know if I caught all that.
Yeah.
So just remember, if there's something important that you want to step into one of these conversations, like making it short and sweet, so the other person can track, they can reflect back, and then you still get another turn to add in more. But to really stay on that same page and have it be a dialogue, short. And then, we talked about this already, but asking for what you want rather than what you don't want. So if I say, I don't want you to yell at me, both of our brains are thinking about yelling. If I say, I want to have a kind and respectful conversation with you, both of our brains are thinking about that. Once again, this is something we have to train our brains, because it's normal to be like, I don't like that. It's a threat. But if we can practice, it goes, oh, okay, I'm going to focus on the positive, what I would want us to shift into.
So sometimes if you're on the receiving end of the conversation, you can feel really flooded, because there's a lot of words, a lot of emotion that might come up in you. And so sometimes you might just need to pause the conversation. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're ending it, you're just pausing it. So sometimes I think, you just pause, I just want to make sure I got what I got so far.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not trying to derail the conversation, you're trying to actually validate what the other person is saying by saying, I want to make sure I got it. I want to make sure I got it. And so it's a good way to really make sure we're getting everything. I think one of the other things is, and I struggle with this because I'm an external processor, right? So I'm an extrovert, external processing. And so one of the hardest things to do is not to interrupt, ask questions, right? Or interpret. So if Lauren is telling me something, and in my head, I might have all these interpretations and biases going on in my head, one of the things I've got to do is shut that part of my brain down and say, can I actually listen to understand? I'm here to hear, but to also understand what Lauren is sharing with me. And then notice what your objections are. Your objections to different. Well, that's not how it went, right? How many of you have had that in your head, right? So how do I put that aside and say, okay, my purpose here is not to defend, my purpose here is to hear. My purpose here is to understand. So we can change the purpose of the conversation in the components of the conversation to say, right now I'm here to hear, understand, because I care.
So the three components that we're going to talk about today is mirroring, which is reflecting back, validating, oh, your perspective makes sense. Doesn't mean we agree, it's saying, I'm doing some perspective taking here, and that perspective makes sense. And then empathizing, making that heart-to-heart connection. So we're going to model this for you.
We are.
We are.
Yes, we are. We have not practiced this. So this is coming out raw.
We both showed up here this morning, we're like, what are we gonna?
Yeah, no, we've done this a lot of times, so it's not like it's new, but I'm just gonna say the topic is probably gonna be a little, not so impressive. So Mark, I have a concern about our finances. I'm wondering if this is now a good time to talk about it.
It is.
Great, well, thank you. So I noticed that when we're spending money and we're trying to figure out what to do with trips, that my anxiety goes up. And when my anxiety goes up, it's really hard for me to focus on trying to enjoy that time that we're trying to plan.
Okay, let me see if I've got it. What I hear you saying is that thinking about spending money and specifically taking trips, you're noticing your anxiety goes up. And that experience takes away from you thinking positively or enjoying or even, I'll just stop there, I'm not gonna interpret, enjoying yourself. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Is there more?
Yeah, and I think the more is that when I get anxious and I can't enjoy, then everything becomes really task-related rather than, I want this connection, but I'm not getting the connection because I'm so focused on the task.
Okay. What I hear you saying is your anxiety goes up, and instead of enjoying, you go into task mode. And when you go into task mode, that becomes the whole focus and even increases the anxiety and decreases connection at that point. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Is there anything more?
Yeah, I think the other thing that happens for me is when I get into that task mode, then I get, and I'm anxious in task mode, then I'm asking everybody all the questions about what they want rather than relaxing, enjoying, and saying, hey, we're gonna have a great time. I have a really hard time getting to that place.
Okay, let me see if I've got it. When you get into task mode, then what you notice is you go into asking everybody questions, trying to organize and plan it all, and you're finding that really isn't helpful for moving into that enjoyment and actually just relaxing and taking it easy. Did I get it?
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, let me see if I've got all of that. What I hear you saying is that your anxiety goes up when we're thinking about spending money and going on trips. And when that anxiety happens, then you can get focused into task mode, you're not enjoying, and task mode can often lead to what do you want to do, what do you want to do, the planning, the scheduling, and that sense of connection or just relaxing and enjoying that process is taken away. Did I get all of that?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. It makes sense to me that when your anxiety goes up, your ability to relax, enjoy, and connect goes down. And it makes sense that when we're talking about money or spending a large chunk of money on vacation, that your anxiety goes up and you feel like you have to manage all the things. Was that a good validation?
That was a great validation. Thank
Okay.
you.
So I can imagine that you might be feeling hesitant to plan something in the future, knowing that that's your experience. Or I could imagine even maybe a sadness of, oh, I wish this process could be different. Are those some of the things you're feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling that, and I think I'm also feeling the sense of, I wish there was more of a collaboration around planning, rather than feeling like I've got to take ownership of the planning.
Mhm. So you're hoping, what you would really want is that there could be a collaboration between us and the planning instead of you carrying it all.
Mhm.
Did I get it?
Yeah.
So do you have a way that we could address this together? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think one of the things that might be helpful is if we could sit down and really talk about when we're going on vacation, that everybody's involved in that planning. Maybe people can take different pieces of the planning, so that I don't feel so anxious like I have to do it all.
Mhm. So your idea is having more of a collaborative, even conversation and starting point, and then breaking up the different pieces of planning to other members of the family.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to share on that?
No, thank you for listening.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing.
So that's actually a real, we haven't actually had that conversation before. And that's actually real for me, so just wanted to let you know.
Learn something.
Yeah, so that was good. What did you guys notice? what did you notice was maybe different about that conversation than other conversations you've had? What
What stood out?
stood out and maybe what was difficult?
Like her opinion didn't come into it yet.
No,
So then we could switch roles,
Yeah.
like we just,
didn't
was the
have,
sender, I was
right.
the receiver, but,
We can
you
switch
know,
that.
we could switch that, yeah.
And usually that'll happen, right? So usually it'll, the transition would be, okay, well, Lauren's heard me, right? She's validated, she's empathized, we've kind of got a starting place for collaboration. Then my next step would be saying, I'm really interested if you're willing to share, I'd like to hear what you're thinking, right? So I'm inviting that in, yeah.
That's very articulated of you to have such mature conversations. A lot of people do not
No.
have that kind of a language. I can do all my part in the listening, in the guiding, in the setting up.
Yeah,
It's just like the ball is in your park
Right.
and nothing. Right?
Yeah.
And the ball is in your park and
For sure.
nothing.
yeah, that's a great point. And
Can you repeat?
yeah, so the question is, really the comment is, you can be articulate, you can be mature enough in your part of the conversation, but what happens if the other person's not in that place, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Right.
And here's what I do, because again, we both coach, we both see clients, and I can tell you most people are not in that place, right? And so I know what I do, and I'm interested to hear what you do in your setting, but what I tend to do is I usually say, so what I hear is, and then whatever they're saying, I just reflect it back. And then I'll ask, is there anything more? And almost always when I ask if there's anything more, there is more. And it's just a matter of, they may give you a one-word sentence, or one word, right? And it's like, I'm sad, or I don't like this. It's like, oh, okay, so what I hear is you don't like this. Tell me more about that, right? So I'm always inviting that conversation of saying, I'm here to hear you, I'm here to understand you, I'm here to listen. Now, sometimes it goes that way and it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. But I can tell you, you planted a seed that is pretty powerful. Like, oh, this person is actually ready to hear me. Go ahead.
So it would then be appropriate action if there is a shutdown, continuous shutdown after you have, tried and fed the continual
Yep.
words, and it's like invitation. So maybe closing the conversations, like, is that not the good time? Do you need more time to think about it? We can resume again later.
Yeah, or even saying something, again, when that shutdown happens from the other person, right? What do I do with that? So maybe I'm gonna say something like, hey, if it's not a great time, that's great. When would be a good time? Let me know when's a good time. What are your thoughts?
My thought is, we've tried this too, is like naming the importance. Like, hey, this conversation for me is really important. It's like a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
So when is gonna work for you to talk to me about this? So I think, putting even a number to it, if somebody's like really concrete, or, it's like, this is really important to me.
And also the other side of that, not everything can be a 10 out of 10 as well. Right. So, I think part of it is really being honest with, okay, this really is a 10 out of 10. This is sort of a 3 out of 10, so it can wait a couple of days, we can come back to it, right? So it's really kind of gauging that. Other things that stood out? Yeah. please.
I'm just gonna follow back up on
Yeah.
this, because I think this is reality, is that sometimes we have, okay, I'll just call it my own household, right? I'm the coach, I'm the one that's asking the questions.
Right.
And I'm putting this stuff out there, and I'm drawing everybody else out, and I'm
Right.
getting theirs. There comes the moment, hey Brenda, there comes the moment where, hello, I would like you to reciprocate
Yes.
this. And how do we help, this is the continual conversation in my
Yeah.
house, is like, okay, AKA Mama just did this for you, here's some tips on how you might wanna draw me out and engage me
Yeah.
on this
Yeah.
without me getting sassy. Because, certain personalities tend to get sassier faster if they don't feel heard. Yes, I would call myself out 150%
Right here.
or not.
I would-
I
I'm with
think
you.
you and I can relate on this.
Yeah,
I
totally
think we've had
relate.
this conversation.
Totally.
But I just think, and I think you're laying some of the template, but I just want to acknowledge the elephant in the
Yeah.
room on that side, because I think we've got a lot of people in the room that they're the ones that are trained, they're the prayer ministers, they're the ones that are committed to that. How do we how do we navigate that without getting resentful or bitter or something else
Yeah.
that might come up?
Or too preachy even,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
too coachy, you know, it's
Yeah.
like I'm constantly feeding you the answers, but like, when do I, you know, like, I don't know, stop, back up and.
And I'm just more acknowledging those, but I'll
So-
tee it up for you, Mark.
Yeah, so Marie's saying, repeat this. What do we do when we have these skills and then the people that are close to us and that we love don't have the skills and we're trying to coach
Yeah.
and we're in that state of feeling alone or that disconnect. Super difficult situation. It can be hurtful. All of this is an ongoing practice, so we could keep inviting people in. One thing is, you know, do we talk about the tools? We actually sat down with our kids and are like, we're gonna teach you something that we learned. And the interesting thing is I talked about reflecting, my daughter's like, I don't like that. People parroting stuff back to me, I feel so demoralized. And I was like, well, I didn't expect that answer. And then I go, I literally just went into it, I'm like, so it's really hard for you when you feel like somebody, I literally did it, and she started crying.
She started going right into the
She
conversation.
just went in, and she was like melted.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would say is, you know, if that is a concern that, you know, is not being reciprocated, talk about it, right? It's saying, hey, Mark, so I've been trying to really work on this kind of conversation. I'm noticing that I'm feeling really alone in it, and I'd really like to talk about that. So that's something we can do, right? So even using these tools to talk about the fact that you're doing it by yourself, right? I mean, that in and of itself can actually be powerful. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just along the same lines, if you, like, I noticed you were parroting like almost word for word. Is that necessary? Okay, because I'm thinking, I would have paraphrased it,
Yeah.
so like, in my own language, this is what I heard, is this what you meant? And that's okay?
Yeah.
So there's a fine line.
I know,
There's a
but
fine
I mean,
line.
asking, is that right?
Yeah, that's great. But I think we want to be really careful that we're not interpreting and we're actually trying to reflect. So, for example, I tend to be more of a paraphraser. I don't usually para word for word. Lauren does, and that's fine, and it doesn't bother me. But I know I have to be really conscious. Am I actually hearing what she's saying, or am I actually interpreting what she's
Yeah.
saying? If I'm interpreting it, then I'm actually not hearing her.
Yeah, so that's just a caution.
Yeah, that's the caution I was.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking out loud here, but a lot of times, even when I'm coaching people, or they're, you know, they are external processors, sometimes it's their first time when they're voicing it out, they're actually having a revelation.
Mhm.
So you're taking that and you're like, this is what I'm hearing, and they're like, oh my gosh, I said that.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll get people sending me a message and I'm like, go back and listen to that, and we'll have a piece of paper.
Yeah,
I don't say blah, 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 everything you said,
right.
but this is what I'm seeing, is that go listen to what you just said.
Yeah.
And you're capturing it,
Mhm.
you're listening. A lot of times people don't listen.
Very powerful.
So I love that.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
So to repeat that, it's when we reflect back, you're giving that person the opportunity to notice what they're actually saying, what they're believing. They're processing the whole time you're reflecting back.
Yeah.
And that's where, is there more? A lot of times people will be like, no, and then they'll be like, oh, yeah, there is
right,
more.
right.
So even having that pause in there,
Well, and sometimes they're using very particular words that mean something really
Right.
special to them.
That's right.
So the word is important.
It can be,
Yeah.
it can be.
Yeah.
And that's why when you say, did I get it?
Mhm.
If that word is important, they'll give you that word again, right? Oh, okay, so that is what I heard. Okay, I'm hearing that. So even if you are paraphrasing, but there's a specific word that's
Yeah.
important to the other person, they'll give it back to you. And that's all right. I mean,
we
again,
didn't model that, but let's say I reflected back and I half got it. Simon, let's just pretend I did that and go, did I get it?
and I would say, yes, and here's something more, right? So we want to try and avoid the negative language, right? We're trying to do that. Now, again, with people who are not trained in it, they'll go to the, no, you didn't get it, right? That's what they'll go to, and that's okay. The other thing I would just say, especially in the settings where maybe that conversation isn't going well, I do think having a third party facilitate it can be really, really helpful. And that's something we do, and I mean, it's been amazing. We had one couple we did this with, and it was amazing kind of what came out of that conversation in terms of, and this was a couple that had been married a long time, so it wasn't like they hadn't had conversation before, but they learned a lot more about each other, and it was really pretty amazing.
Yeah, so we facilitate these conversations, and we have a course on it, and, we integrate this into that whole transformational journey. So we have lots of options if you guys are like intrigued by this and want to learn more, or want to invite somebody to come in and have a conversation with you. The cool thing about that is you're actually addressing the issue and you're learning a skill at the same time.
Yes.
But you're not having to feed it all. We as the facilitator would be holding the safety. We would be setting up the guidelines and the structure, so you wouldn't have to manage that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get to be a participant rather than a coach and
Yes,
participant.
exactly.
And and all of the above.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's hard.
I see we're a little bit over, so.
I've had a recent experience of having activity where walking on eggshells
Yes.
is just really big
Yes.
and really impacting. And you even say, let's have a serious conversation without walking on eggshells.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, I'm vulnerable, are you ready to get rid of all the eggshells or the emotional unsafety?
Right, it's a psychological safety piece, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and I like your point of saying, when we notice the eggshells, when we notice those feelings inside of us, that is a great time to be like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. Is now a good time, or when is a good time? Yeah, that's a
Especially-
signal for us
Yes,
to be like,
eggshells is usually about avoidance, right? It's avoiding the
yeah,
conflict.
yeah, turning away.
It's a turning place.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Anyway, so hopefully this was helpful, hopefully pretty concrete. And if you want any other thoughts, or, we'll be here for
Yeah, we're gonna be here for
questions,
the
so-
morning, you can always chat with us, you
Please.
can tell, we're super
Yeah,
passionate
we
about
love
this
this.
stuff, we love it.
What's your website?
Oh,
It's on the handout
it is
thing,
on the handout, but for
smmcoachingconsulting.com. smmcoachingconsulting.com is our website. Also, you can go to the transformativerelationship.com, and that's also specifically our website for about relationship.
awesome.